Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about Gaza Writes Back, short stories from young writers in Gaza, Palestine, edited by Refaat Alareer. This volume and another volume, which I hope to review later this year, are the only two of this type that we have from Refaat. Unfortunately, he was murdered in December of 2023 by the IDF, so we're not going to have any more of these books, but we should treasure them all the more for what they are. This is the first book of its kind. Gaza Writes Back records and commemorates in fiction the 5th anniversary of the full-scale military offensive Israel launched on Gaza between December 27, 2008 and January the 18th, 2009, the so-called Operation Cast Lead. Now, we think about Gaza Writes Back as a phrase, as a frame. We can go back to what I alluded to this actually in Home in Exile, the review I did by Chinua Achebe. And Achebe also refers to this notion of the empire writes back, which we've heard from Salman Rushdie before. So what happens when the dispossessed have a voice? They get to write back. And this is what's going on here in this text. In fact, I'll read you some more from Refaat. He wrote this in November of 2013. Gaza writes back because storytelling helps construct Palestinian national identity and unity. Gaza writes back because there is a Palestine that needs to be rescued, at least textually for the time being. Gaza tells stories because Palestine is at a short story span. Gaza narrates so that people might not forget. Gaza writes back because the power of imagination is a creative way to construct a new reality. Gaza writes back because writing is a nationalist obligation, a duty to humanity, and a moral responsibility. So up until this time on the channel, I've been talking about history, trying to give myself and the rest of you some more historical context to understand what's going on, and I'm not giving that up. But what I'd like to do for the next month is to focus on Palestinian voices themselves, who are telling their own story in very recent times. So we're not talking about things that happened in 1948 or 1917 or even 1967. We're talking about stuff that happened in 2008. Hopefully we'll talk about stuff that happened in 2013, maybe as late as 2020. But I want to give you, at least in my very short way that I can hear, some of these Palestinian voices so you can hear from the people themselves who are going through this unimaginable horror that we're not going to hear about in the mainstream. This is an anthology of short stories, so I can't read every story, obviously, but I picked 3 which affected me a lot when I read them, and I think will give you some insight into the type of stories that you're going to hear here. So the first one I'll start with is called Canary, and it's by Noor Al-Susi. Now, it's already not a long story. It's just a few pages, but I'm just going to read a little bit of it, a little excerpt of it, just to give you some sense of it, without obviously reading the whole story to you. He was running with his brother to the UNRWA water truck to bring fresh water. The camp did not have fresh water for days. They queued for an hour or so, filled up 2 jerry cans, lifted them on their shoulders, and staggered on their way back home to the edge of the camp. Attracted by the sound of a bird, he put down the jerry can and wanted to chase it, a hobby they pursued whenever their mother was away from home. "It's a canary," yelled Ghassan. "I saw it first," he said. "I can get it for you if you wait there," Ghassan said. The canary flew into the bushes of the outskirts of the nearby Jewish settlement. It took only 1 gunshot. His brother and the canary were silenced forever in front of his eyes. Obviously, this is a story that comes from real life, comes from things that have been witnessed, things that have been seen. And what is fantastic about the narration that we get here is we don't expect it from what you're reading in the story so far. And that's why it's so devastating, because we're having a little opportunity to realize the shock that has to happen. That's part of the daily life of people who live in Gaza, people who live in Palestine in general. That when you're shocked reading through the text and you're surprised about something that happens out of nowhere and yet is completely expected, you're captured by the tragedy of what you've read. So The Canary, as I said, is written by Noor Al-Susi, and I want to tell you a little bit about her. Noor finished her BA in English Language and Literature from the Islamic University of Gaza. Reading and writing were Noor's passions since she was a young child. Since then, writing became second nature, something like breathing. The composition classes were her favorite, and nothing has ever pleased her more than the look of admiration in the teacher's eyes after reading a piece or a story she had written. By the way, all these pieces are being written in English, which for many of these people are not their first language, probably not even their second language. In her own words, as the Second Intifada broke out in September 2000, I started to understand how our life as Palestinians is a struggle. In such a struggle, I had nothing but my pen to hold, so I wrote several short stories about martyrs who were my age. So that's Canary again by Noor al-Susi. Next one I'd like to read a little bit to you about is The Story of the Land, and this is by an author named Sarah Ali. Let's see if I find the right place. During those 23 days of the Israeli attack on Gaza, we were constantly receiving news of land being run over by Israeli bulldozers. We were told thousands of trees were gone. We were told my uncle's trees were gone. We were told our trees were gone. We were told Sharga, the whole district of eastern farmland, was gone. But these were rumors, or so my father wanted to believe. We all had hoped that our land was still intact, totally untouched. We were clinging to the assumption that only other people's trees could get uprooted, but certainly not our beautiful, unmatched olives. Certainly not the trees that were, to my father, the only thing he boasted of to prove he was no less of a Gazan than those who repeatedly reproached him for it, as they put it, recklessly leaving the land of black gold, where they assumed he swam in Kuwaiti oil pools every day, and for coming to live here with a small h. My father looked at it quite differently, for here, he always believed, is the land of al-Zayt al-Muqaddas, the holy oil. So the person who's writing is trying to ask about more details about what happened, because he's thinking about, the father thinks he's about applying for a charity. No, Baba, I am just writing something for my blog. Blog, okay, whatever that is. So how many trees were uprooted? 180 olive trees, I guess, and 189 olive trees, 160 lemon trees, 14 guava trees, he bellowed, angry that I missed the exact number. Embarrassed, I lowered my head and wondered why I was doing this to myself. My thoughts were interrupted when he went on. Next time you decide to do whatever it is that you want to do right now, get your numbers straight. I made no reply. You hear me? There were 189 olive trees. Not 180, not 181, not even 188. 189 olive trees. He left the room a few minutes afterwards. Guilt was all I could feel. That an Israeli soldier could bulldoze 189 olive trees on the land he claims as part of the God-given land is something I will never comprehend. Did he not consider the possibility that God might get angry? Did he not realize that it was a tree he was running over? If a Palestinian bulldozer were ever invented, haha, I know, and I were given the chance to be in an orchard, in Haifa, for instance, I would never uproot a tree an Israeli planted. No Palestinian would. To Palestinians, the tree is sacred, and so is the land bearing it. And as I talk about Gaza, I remember that Gaza is but a little part of Palestine. I remember that Palestine is bigger than Gaza. Palestine is the West Bank. Palestine is Ramallah. Palestine is Nablus. Palestine is Jenin. Palestine is Tulkarm. Palestine is Bethlehem. Palestine, most importantly, is Jaffa and Haifa and Akka and all those cities that Israel wants us to forget about. So let me tell you a little about Sarah, who wrote the story which I just read an excerpt from. Sarah Ali, a Palestinian born in Kuwait in 1991, is a resident of Gaza and grew up in Gaza City. In 2009, she joined the Faculty of Arts at the Islamic University of Gaza and graduated in 2013 with a bachelor's degree in English, Language, and Literature. Currently, Sarah works as an English language teacher and trainer. In her own words, writing is both a way of self-expression and a way of spreading the word and revealing the truth about the injustice done to the Palestinian people. So the last one I'm going to read is a story called Please Shoot to Kill by Jahan Al-Farah. And I'm reading the very end of the story, so I suppose a bit of a spoiler alert if you are going to read it, that there is there is a character that dies here. But what's so tragic and wonderful, I suppose those are the two words I would use, is the character tries to contextualize her own suffering against what everyone else is going through to make sure that she doesn't feel sorry for herself in a way that trivializes other people's sufferings. Abu Layla died 3 months later. Regardless of the anguish, Layla tried to convince herself and her family that they were still fortunate compared to others. The family was lucky that the walls of their house were still standing, and they did not have to live in a tent and endure the brutality of winter's cold and summer's heat. Salma, who was still in diapers when she got hit by an Israeli missile, was also lucky that her brain was still in its place, that she was able to get treatment inside Gaza, and that the roof of the house did not fall on her body, forcing the family to dig out the pieces of her flesh from underneath. Layla was lucky her physical health was good, and that she was able to fend for her family and provide for them. Sarah was lucky she was not also physically injured, adding to her psychological disturbance. And Layla was also lucky to pass out and not witness more of what could only be called hell on earth before they were taken to the hospital. She was also lucky she had the ability to still concentrate enough to ace her exams and win the scholarship she had always dreamed of. The family's calamity was not that much of a calamity when placing it on the scale of severity of Gaza's tragedies. So I'll tell you a little bit about Jehan. Jehan Al-Farah is a 24-year-old blogger and multimedia activist from the Gaza Strip. Jehan advocates the Palestinian cause and the reality of life in Gaza through social media and various multimedia outlets by collaborating with international and local organizations. Jehan is telling the story of Palestine, the story that stems from the world of tents and is marked by nights of hunger, darkness, and fear, the story of children, the story that lives on hopes of self-determination and has survived years and years of misery, agony, and tears, replacing them with echoing laughter and lively smiles. The story of episodes of pain repeated one day after another and yet faced with incredibly strong, light-spirited hearts. The story of a pen that never seems to run out of ink. The story of what F-16 jets, Apaches, Merkava tanks, and machine guns do. The story of stones lying on the banks of the land. The story of an exceptional instinct for survival despite despair and ultimate injustice. The story of a place that used to be home, in a matter of a few decades became home for others as Palestinians became the outcast strangers. In her own words, as a young Palestinian girl, and a Gazan for that matter, I feel obliged to represent Palestinian life, with its tragedies on the one hand and its joys on the other. And in light of the mounting instability of the situation on the Palestinian ground, particularly the siege on Gaza, it has become a compulsory responsibility for me to put into words and reflect the reality of our day-to-day lives, given the failure of the Western media in doing so. And I suppose that's something else that I really appreciated about the book is for a lot of us, especially those of us who, like me, have not been able to go inside Gaza. I was only able to talk to people at the Erez crossing. We tend to, speaking for myself, think of Gaza as this hellscape where people have to go through this horrible situation. But what the book reveals, in particular one story, which I didn't have the chance to talk about, is that there are inequalities even within Gaza, where you have people living in the refugee camps and people living in, let's say, more built-up areas where there isn't a sewage problem where sewage is running down the street, that it's not one situation in Gaza. And keeping in mind, the people in Gaza are not all experiencing the same thing. And to hear it from Gazans themselves and accusing themselves, in particular in the story, of ignorance about what some of the refugees are going through. So keeping in mind, refugees from other parts of Palestine, as opposed to native Gazans, people who are born and raised in Gaza, that's their land, as opposed to the refugees from other parts of Palestine. They're there, you could say, hiding out, staying as refugees until such time, God willing, in the future, they can return to their land. And it's not a single experience that's going on in Gaza. There are many, many different experiences. And I can't wait to read, I wouldn't call it a sequel, but there was another Israeli operation, another IDF operation, and another text was written. And as I say, I hope to talk about that later this year, not necessarily this month, because there's other texts that I want to share. But I really want to encourage you to get a copy of this book. It's widely available. There's a link to it below, and get to know and get to hear the Palestinian story from the Palestinians themselves, particularly young people who are experiencing this as their lives. This is what they're growing up in. This isn't something that they heard about from their parents. This is something that they're experiencing from themselves. Obviously, they know about the Nakba and they know those stories as well, but these are most immediately the stories that they've experienced growing up themselves. So, as always, if you liked what you heard here, hit like, hit subscribe. Please share this video with other people who you know would be interested to learn more about what's going on in Gaza and hearing from the Palestinians themselves. If you'd like to do more, you can obviously join my Patreon, which is linked below, or become a member on YouTube. You'll get early access to videos like this, as well as have an opportunity to suggest other books for me to cover in the future. You can also choose from my Amazon wish list. Send me a book that you're interested in having me review. As I said before, in 2024, my emphasis and my focus is on Israel and Palestine and talking about those issues. But obviously, I'll still review one book that's not about Israel and Palestine every month this year. And you have an opportunity to move that book up, whatever book you might be interested in. I can't promise that I'll necessarily do that, but it's an opportunity. And finally, in 2024, a portion of any proceeds I get from Patreon, YouTube ad sales, etc., are going to go to the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, which provides free medical care to Palestinian children who would not otherwise be able to receive that care. And as I said, I'll be donating to that, but feel free to donate directly and support that cause yourself. As always, enjoy your reading.